everybody. My name is Tom Brennan, and I'm with Crest. I'm presenting today a little bit of information around threat intelligence and how some organizations can go ahead and deal with the problem that they face on a day-to-day basis. So let's get into it, shall we? So one of the first things I like to start off with is a question. Cybersecurity to me is almost like a game. So what game would use the catchphrase, "Shall we play a game?" That's right. If you recall, back in 1983, it was war games. And for many of us gray-haired type guys, that may have been an early exposure to some of the mischief and mayhem that was about to unfold in the cybersecurity space. So let's take it one step further. Let's play another game. Let's assume for a moment that you come to a building and you go up to the elevator and you enter and go into the 5th floor. You walk out of the elevator and you open up a door to a room. When you open up the door to the room, you enter. The door will close behind you. On your left-hand side, there would be a switch, and directly in front of you is a light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Can you name 5 ways that you can shut off the light bulb without touching the light bulb itself? That's right. You can hit the light switch. That's the easiest one. Maybe you're going to throw your shoe at it. Perhaps you're going to go ahead and break it by some other means. You might use social engineering and pick up the phone and call the electric company and shut off the power. Or you might redirect payment and default on the bill. So again, there's many different ways to shut off a light bulb, but I want you to start thinking a little bit critically about different ways to do different things. And yes, some people like to go downstairs to the breaker box and flip the breaker switch. So by show of hands, let's think about this logically. You're probably a part of a business of some size. For some people in the room or on the call, your business may be very small, from let's say 1 to 100 people. And that task is difficult because everybody is moving very rapidly and quickly. They don't want a lot of red tape. There's not a lot of extra budget or people. Let's accelerate that to the next level. Perhaps you're a business that's between 100 people to 1,000 people. Your organization obviously has revenue, and you've been around for a little bit of time, and you're kind of moving in a forward direction. And there's, again, some outlined policies and processes. There's some technical teams. There's some unique software. And in fact, it's very important for the organization to stay resilient and be able to recover to keep servicing perhaps their clients, customers, or organizations that they're built for. If you get bigger than that and you're considered a larger organization, 1,000 people, maybe up to 10,000 people, well, your organization has some girth, right? There's a lot of people depending on the business to do the right thing. You may or may not be publicly traded. You may or may not have to account to the shareholders. You may also have to account to people within industry that may be under regulation, that they try to regulate certain industries, and now you're meeting requirements, almost like a tax on the cybersecurity program. Then, of course, if you're extra large and you're over 10,000 people, you fall into that category of potentially a global business that has to deal with interesting laws and different effects around the world. So again, the job's not easy. So look around and let's learn from some of our peers. Also, if you're a local business, a national business or international, as was stated, there's also lots of different components that need to be addressed. Always a good phone ringing when you don't want that to happen on a Zoom meeting. But also, let's go ahead and look at the question of who in the room or who on the call has enough people, right? There's lots of jobs within the technical space, everything from the underappreciated help desk people to the far right, which is software development, building tools, building widgets, building solutions for the business. And of course, we have our cybersecurity folks that do incident response, operations, network management, add moves and changes, etc. All these jobs have unique skill sets, and it seems that there's never enough time in the day. Who also has enough budget? Who also has enough budget in their organization that they're able to accomplish all the goals that they want to accomplish while still trying to build a defensive posture, right? Being able to protect against the things that are most focused on their organization. What's surprising is I don't see many hands on that question. right? Typically, when we're in front of an audience and we're asking that same question, no hands go up because, of course, everybody's usually over leveraged and underutilized. Oh, excuse me, under leveraged and overutilized. So a little bit about me. My background, I've been in technology now for over 30 years. I've been working with different organizations around the world. I've been a part of some really great organizations that I've had an opportunity to watch grow and also be part of some of those acquisitions and changes, which is fantastic. And I've also held a lot of different job roles. So I feel like I have a lot of different perspectives based on what's in front of me. And that's really about critical thinking, right? The ability to go ahead and know sort of what button to push as it pertains to what problem is in front of you. So the button to push, of course, certainly is cybercrime. In many cases, that's the primary focus of what we call these days of cybersecurity. But I also like to remind everybody once and for all that cyber operations is, really about keeping the business doing what it does. Crime is going to happen. There's always acceptable risk. Even organizations that are our peers, we look at them and say, well, they have acceptable loss, acceptable risk. Now, this also goes to the far left, the military side of acceptable casualties, and say in terms of war, to the far right, where that you might have some financial loss based on fraud. That's built into the the P&L or built into the balance sheet for the business. But what's important, of course, is understanding those risks and putting them in sort of context as to what they can do, what the impact will be, and then how are we going to deal with the risk associated with the problem. Most of us deal with issues that are tied to things like malware analysis, looking for indicators of compromise, vulnerability intelligence, and threat actors and who they are. But with these sort of areas of focus, it's really important to understand that when there's a problem and you have intelligence, you have data that your organization is looking at to help identify issues before those problems, it's really important that when the problem has been discovered and when the problem is actually underway, that most importantly, you got to stay calm, right? You got to look at the situation clearly. You got to try to ensure personal safety is very important. Just keep in mind a couple things here. Let's assume your organization was caught up in a very high-profile financial attack, and billions of dollars were disrupted or stolen for that. Don't you think that the adversary is also very much focused on the people in your organization as to who they are, what their capabilities are? Don't you think for a moment that you might need to be aware of things like kidnapping? That you might need to be aware of such crazy things like the TV drama that somebody is abducted because there's a significant risk that the bad guy's going to go to jail. I mean, at this time in our life, we have to look at the cyber component. It's just one realm that is operational. You combine physical security and electronic security. These issues together are really important. Hence, why you need to be able to seek assistance, be able to have those relationships built up in place to deal with threats, right? This also extends to working with local law enforcement and being able to work with people associated to the organization before there's a problem. So making a proactive plan, super important to any organization. Being able to communicate the plan, perhaps during tabletop exercises and train like you're going to fight is super important to any business. So again, making time for these issues takes labor, takes people, takes budget, because again, you have to pay for the time and the resources that are involved in the project, right? And more importantly, if you do need to engage a third party, I can't stress enough that they come to the rescue. I always like to say I surround myself with people that run towards bullets because I won't be disappointed. But when you have to make those phone calls and people actually show up to help you with your problem, take a moment to listen. Take a moment to follow instructions. And at that point, work collectively with your third party so they can actually help you with the situation. They've done it before. And that holds a lot of weight. And in particular, if you're looking to go after the root cause, whether that be for criminal proceedings or for understanding how that threat happened, it's really important to understand to properly preserve evidence, right? This partially contains chain of custody. God forbid you have to go to court and testify against something. But more importantly, it's not difficult to make a slip up as it pertains to a technology problem. Let's say you pull the plug on a system, you think that's what you should be doing when you have a potential compromise. And then, of course, memory resident access to that machine is there. By pulling a plug, let's say it disappears. So again, know what you're dealing with during your scenario. So There is no cybersecurity easy button. There really isn't. There's a lot of great information available to you, a lot of great information, guides, best practices, and steps. And again, you can have bookshelves and bookshelves full of material. And you also can have lots of different people corresponding as to what the right way to do certain things are, right? We can spend an entire presentation around, let's say, testing the security awareness of individuals through phishing, for example, or how to properly code a web application to limit the OWASP top 10. But there's lots of different approaches. One of the approaches I really wanted to call out to make sure people spend some time understanding is the Center for Internet Security Controls. The controls in the version 8 guidance are fantastic. And I mean that they are well thought out. There's a considerable amount of level of effort and people that contributed hours and hours of time, hundreds of hours of time in some cases, to provide entries into some of the control areas. I would say that there's a long list of control areas, but let's touch on some of them to make sure that we can cover those 18 critical control areas and kind of what some of them are. The first one, of course, is know what you are and know what you're not, which starts off with an inventory of your assets, right? Do you know what's public facing? Do you know what has an internet address? Do you know where your entry points are and your exit points? Do you know what ports and what services are running within your environment? If you have these controls in place, you're able to kind of produce a summary of what your attack footprint looks like. It helps the organization at all, at all sizes, big, medium, and small, to be able to sort of know what's within scope. Software, similar. But today, if you run, let's say, Windows on the desktop, and let's say you don't let anybody have global administrator on the machine except for people that need it for their business purpose, and even that's a small group of maybe developers that are writing some code and need admin credentials to certain programs. The point is that there's many ways to circumvent technical control. Would this be browser extensions that are unmodified by the organization? Let's say you're not using a group policy to restrict them. Let's say that you still have the Windows Store enabled and people are still able to pull things down from the Windows Store because, again, you haven't blocked it using Intune. There's components here that are tied to the software artifacts that are in the organization that need to be monitored very closely. How many authorized applications are you running? What is the version of those applications? Are they licensed? Are they configured properly for adequate security controls? And going through this is a very good example of understanding, again, what you have and how you're configured. Data protection. Everyone understands that data is at rest, should be encrypted. Data is in motion, should be encrypted across the wire so you can intercept, listen, and grab credentials or grab data inflow, right? So in all aspects of data flow, we should be thinking about how do we protect that data. And more importantly, think about how we protect the data. Not all data is equal, right? And not all data has a lifespan. Some things are very adequately protected if it has a short lifespan. It's a short communication that, quite frankly, if it's public knowledge in 5 days, it wouldn't matter. Who cares? But other communication might be held in strict confidence for years. So again, understand the data, understand the protection requirements, and in some cases, understand the state or federal requirements or international requirements, right? Number 4, secure configuration of assets. Can't tell you how many times we've had incidents around the world that I've been a part of personally that we look at root cause and get back to the 5 whys. Why was the problem, why did the company have a breach? Well, they had a breach because of this episode. Well, is it tied perhaps to system configurations that were never secured properly, never tested, never validated, never verified? A lot of times it is. A lot of times it is convenience where somebody puts an RDP, remote desktop protocol connection, public facing, allows it to punch through the firewall, for 3389 is public facing for remote services. And then somebody forgets to set a strong password or go ahead and have this as a criteria for remote access. Then, problems pop up at RDP, box gets popped remotely, it's remotely exploitable. And again, things happen, right? Or weak passwords, things are brute force, again, things happen. So sometimes it's about the configuration that's really, really important. Account management. When people lead organizations, big and small, in many cases, there's things that are kind of common, like not changing the administrator username because it doesn't usually lock out unless it's supposed to be set for that. therefore, if I was to brute force the admin account and I kind of look for random passwords that your business may have used, I might get lucky. But more importantly, what about those service accounts? What about those service accounts that have domain admin access that are on every machine that I can potentially log in as a service and be able to run something? If I get access to one machine and I focus on privilege escalation, focus on attacking that local box, and that service account ever logged into that account, I can grab that local cache and replay it, right? Be able to go ahead and use information on the local machine to then go out and move laterally or compromise other systems within the environment. This allows me to move pretty quickly and get to my goal, which is probably a domain controller. But I'm going to look for domain admin threats and do the same thing, right? My point is being able to understand how account management gets sloppy, and then of course access the system. Do you need 10 guys in the company that all have global admin permission? No. Should you be able to have a record of when people are using privileged access to access a resource or system? Absolutely. Should you be able to prove that over the last 6 months or over the last year, demonstrate to, let's say, an auditor that in fact you do have the appropriate controls in place? Yeah, probably. Why? Because compliance is not security. But when you need the data and you're compliant to, let's say, the CIS version 8 controls, you'll be in a much better position to be able to go back and go, wow, look, we did have an initial compromise 235 days ago. Luckily, our organization has controls in place. Luckily, it backs it up with a retention scale of 5 years or 3 years or 2 years, depending on what the business is in and what they want to account for. Again, continuous vulnerability management. Again, looking at the organization almost when nobody's looking for problems or system issues. Now, there's lots of great tools out there. Tools do a great job, right? They automate tasks. They scan boxes. They look for response times. And they look for banners. They look for ports on services, that things that are open and change. And they do a little poking, a little bit of prodding. And then hopefully they're able to provide you with some context of saying, hey, yes, if there's a vulnerability out there, it's in the wild. I like to say if it's a vulnerability of CVSS version 7 and above, you should try to get on that immediately, like within 14 days. Like deal with it, test it in the lab, and fix it, patch it. If you can't do that, well, then you need mitigating controls. You need to understand what are the impact to the business if that system was to be compromised by a bad guy, by a third party. So again, it's part of risk and part of logic as to controlling your environment. Audit log management. Touched on it briefly, but again, know what you're logging, log things that are critical, be able to play back data in scenarios. Don't log things just to log them. So not only is it a waste of space, which is pretty cheap these days, but it's a waste of resources. You may also have some compliance issues. Let's say you're logging failed password attempts, or you're logging PII data. There's certain data that you may not want to log because there's no usefulness in the cyber side of recovery. So remember, think about what you're tracking, what you're logging, and try your best to marry that to the business best practices that your individual company is under. If you don't have a good answer, then seek assistance from your general counsel. Email and web browser protection. Again, spoke a little bit about plugins within browsers being problematic, and they really are. Especially if you're utilizing some of the new plugins that let you to remotely share browsers. Awesome feature for collaboration. Really good feature for bad guys for collaboration as well. Meaning bad guys use the same good guy tools, right? It just depends on how you use them. And then of course email. We all know email. We all get too much email, and more importantly, we click on too much stuff. But that's what people do, right? Email is meant for that. So a good filter for spam. A good tool that might explode emails or links or even attachments to determine if they are known, bad, or not. If they look them up on Virus Total and they go through a hash review and they look at the IP for IP reputation, good, right? Good. Is there going to be that one that slips through? Of course, right? It's not difficult. You're going to stand something up. If you're a bad guy, you're going to pop a box. That box is going to be where you're attacking from. If you're a bad guy, you're going to create a nice phishing email, right? If you're a bad guy, you're going to communicate or potentially over a compromised system or relay through an open STP gateway, and you're going to get an email into the guy. And you're going to talk about, I don't know, his kid who needs to get picked up from college because of some medical problem. Point of it is some luring communication that would be appropriate for social engineering is going to get clicked on. And then, of course, that is going to be burning up a typically unknown attack vector. Maybe the attacker is aware of a way to leverage a browser. They're going to hook a browser using a beef tool that's going to allow them to take over the browser and actually act as a third party. Again, there's all different threat scenarios. I'm trying to give you some ideas that the controls around the CIS controls is very, very useful and helpful to think through some of these things and apply the appropriate controls. Control 10. Started to touch on malware defenses because malicious software, of course, is easy to build. It's easy to build because if I'm building software for a particular function, it hasn't actually been put out there in the wild yet. So its hash value is maybe unknown. So if I'm going to target a very select group of individuals or companies or organizations, until somebody detects that it's a problem, that's probably not going to be treated as bad, right? Real simple. Data recovery. What's your SLA? Think about your SLA to your business. What is the process to recover from a fire, a flood, a natural disaster, a hack? What's a process to recover when one of your IT guys goes sideways and deletes and destroys things because you did them wrong? These are scenarios, right? We got to play it out. And how do you recover from that? What is the service level agreement with the business? What's reasonable? Then, of course, what's your responsibility in that process? Again, it's always helpful to work through these scenarios, particularly during tabletop exercise. Control 12, network infrastructure management. You need to know what's up, what's down. Got to know where things are, right? Got to know where your latency is. If you're getting choke points within the network, typical stuff. But being able to have tools in place for that particular purpose is very, very helpful. Just like network monitoring and defense. If I was to find out that there was a lot of changes to devices in the environment, or somebody decides to put a new widget plug into the network and it's now physically on the environment, you might want to know about that, right? This is the sort of stuff that monitoring of that activity is usually there. And a good defense is always, 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 always to put a honeypot on your network and call it, I don't know, payroll, and see who happens to knock on the door, right? Maybe you put it out there and call it game system, or you put it out there and you call it payroll, and you want to go ahead and put a share out there and call it bonuses. The point of it is that technology people, all of us these days, are going to understand how to use network neighborhood. They're going to see systems out there. They're going to play around. It's the ones that are going to play that you need to sort of have an eyeball on, right? If you hired a new intern in your organization, or you hired a person at a role within the company, sometimes that might be the easiest attack vector for a third-party threat. Let me say it again. Sometimes the easiest attack vector is putting a body within inside the building to provide a real function. So they basically bypass HR by demonstrating credentials, fake social security number. They fill out an I-9 form. They fill out a temporary position. They work a job. They have access to the system. Now they're on the inside. Makes it a hell of a lot easier for third-party attackers to hit something from a parking lot, right, or even across the internet. So again, remember the context of people that work on systems and who they are and what they do. Again, service provider management. This one's actually near and dear to my heart. I work a lot with CREST. And CREST is an international accreditation body. We accredit service providers. We do a deep diligence dive on service providers, that they are accredited, they're in business, they have the right organizational structure, contracts, insurances, et cetera, and then also they have the right people on their team delivering, said labor services. That ties back to, they have a team of accredited people that have demonstrated and have the skill set to provide services to the buyer. So if you're interested in that stuff, CREST is a great place to check out. crest-approved.org is the place to go. Moving on. Application software security. Application software security, I've done a lot, I think, in the community tied to the Open Web Application Security Project. I've also worked with SafeCode. I've done some, I think, good software stuff. And more importantly, what's important about software security is knowing what is in the standard bill of materials. What's in the software that composes the product or the widget that either you're selling or that you're buying. Having some transparency there is super, super important to the risk profile of the business, right? If you're going to go ahead and produce software, does it go through a quality review? Some of your clients might now require it, so it's probably a good part to consider looking at it. If you're testing software security for resiliency or confidentiality, integrity, or availability, yes, availability, denial of service. If you're testing it against something, Perhaps you want to use the OWASP testing guide, the Open Web Application Security Project at owasp.org. There's some great resources. OWASP is all about the individual that gives back to the community. Many of us participate in many projects. And of course, in our spare time, what are we usually doing? Well, we're geeking out trying to fix things with best practices, guides, and tools. So OWASP is a good example. Also, if you're interested in looking at how to build software securely, highly encourage you to take a look at the ASVS or the mobile ASVS project at OWASP. Moving on, incident response. Incident response is a service that is provided to organizations, but it's also a little bit of an art. It's a little bit of an investigative function as well. I've had the opportunity to not only work with law enforcement, but to respond to different types of incidents. And again, keep calm, right? First step, know where the problem is and try your best to navigate through it appropriately. Incident response management is best done before there's a problem. Again, before there's a problem. So do a tabletop exercise, sit down with your people over a cup of coffee or a glass of wine and say, hey, something really, really bad just happened. Maybe our marketing department was compromised. There's a bunch of things being said in social media that's not appropriate for the business. And now our customer base is freaking out, right? Perhaps internally you had some integrity issues with data sets that no longer equal 1 + 1 = 2. Now it's 1 + 1 = 50. Some integrity problem in that software that you're using, right? Point of it is IR and management, again, is a difficult process. But remember, means, motive, and opportunity. Means the technical attacker. Motive, why are they doing it? What's their purpose? What's their motivation, right? And opportunity. Opportunity happens because none of the commercially defensible guidance was followed, which made it easy for the bad guy, which brings us to control 18. Penetration testing. It's easy to break things. It really is. There's a lot of people in the world that have a match and want to see it on fire. So that's easy to do, meaning put things on fire. Testing software or testing devices or testing security. There's lots of time to test and find issues and problems. Building is hard. So there needs to always be a balance between what's possible, what's probable, what's likely, what's not likely. This is typically called threat modeling. So again, it goes back to some of the other control conversations we had. But when you do conduct a third party or internal assessment of a system, again, it's really important to follow a loose methodology where that you're going to sort of footprint the item, look at what ports and services are available, what is the application, what is the flow, how does the physical components work, how is it assembled, who maintains it, and look at the way to approach it. Sometimes it's as easy as hacking a company by going to somebody's garbage can of one of the employees on a Monday and grabbing it from the street and looking at what they threw out and get some indication as to who they are, reset their passwords remotely, log in and do devastation to a business, right? That's a good old attacker approach. Or sometimes it's more complex than that, where we're looking actually for a probe of a site or a service, looking for a response. And again, my example here is pen testing, red teaming is really a matter of risk. Are you concerned about the attacker that has put in alarm systems and has gone ahead and written software and has done network security? Or are you looking to just keep out sort of the indiscriminate bot or worm across the internet looking for an open port or open service? Are you looking to keep out the dedicated attacker that may have access to both open source or commercial tools, but may not be very coordinated? Or are you looking to keep out a very coordinated group of individuals that are going to share knowledge and they're going to attack an organization? We might want to say, oh, the scary APT guys, but we also might want to say the guys that are collaborating, that are going to target you as an organization. Again, one of my famous sort of statements is the only difference between the bad guy and the good guy is ethics. I've met a lot of people in the cybersecurity space. Some of them have questionable ethics, and some of them don't. It just depends on who you're going to work with. And again, politics, laws, countries, all these things play into the discussion. But think very closely about who is your threat. So when you do the Center for Internet Security version 8 control review, it's really important to when you measure those different objectives, there's about 220 different items that I would measure. But you really want to look at then where's your maturity with each one of these different areas. If we basically say incident response, yeah, I'd call my guy, I know a guy, and we've talked about it once over coffee, then good for you, right? Congratulations, you're at 20%, right? You're kind of in the initial phase. But if somebody has a well-defined program with a tabletop exercise and they wrote down some materials, and God forbid they get hit by a bus, can somebody read it and reasonably recover the business? Right? Is that provision in place, or is it really optimized where that it's really focused on an ongoing basis, and there's actually a dedicated team of people that do coop work or contingency planning, right? Like, what maturity is the organization really at? And does it need to be? Because not all organizations need to be optimized, right? So again, remember, maturity scoring is really important, because it has to kind of look like and feel like the dashboard on your car. If you're driving in your car, you're driving your business, and you're an officer of the corporation, you're obviously concerned with the overall overarching focus of the business. You're not necessarily focused on one aspect or one department or one system or one server or one thing, right? You're focused on the overall framework. So it's important to make sure that you treat that high-level discussion just like a dashboard on your car. This is what we measure against. This is where we score. We have people doing certain things. At the end of the day, if things turn red or green, they do that for a reason. Green, hopefully being good, because you put time, energy, and effort into making it that way and then maintaining it that way. Yellow might be, hey, this is the best we're going to get because we're trying our best to drive an initiative and the business has accepted certain risks and it is what it is. Or it's in the red, which is like, wow, we haven't thought about that, or we haven't put budget to that yet, or really we don't have any expertise on staff. But again, dashboard on a car, if you think about it in those terms, your measurement will be helpful. This will not provide you security, because compliance and security are very different. But what it will provide you is understanding as to where you're at in the maturity life cycle. And then that will help you reduce the risk, which will overall help you in your defenses in deployment of security. Org charts. Your staff on your team is the most important thing. Every business I've ever worked at, it was always interesting to watch the composition of the team and to listen and learn. And in some cases, I led teams. In other cases, I moved on teams. So I always say lead, follow, or get out of the way. But more importantly, it's really about the organization structure. So if you are in an org chart and you are struggling with your team members, maybe it's time to look to move to another group. If that doesn't work for you, then maybe it's time to look for another team. But my point is that composition matters. Leadership of the team should be, in my opinion, clear communication. There should be a black and white approach. You have to manage to a policy, because there has to be something to hold people accountable to, good and bad, so that when people make certain achievements or milestones, you can congratulate them in a certain way. The same way that if somebody was to be grossly negligent, there needs to be a measurement to say, hey, this is just completely unacceptable in our business. Again, that's all org chart stuff. I also happen to believe that whether it be internal people, especially when you're hiring new people, certifications do play a role. If they're paper certs, so it's what I call knowledge tests, well, that's useful, right? It's helpful that you know the knowledge. But if they're hands-on practical examinations, where that it actually tests somebody's hands-on ability to do the work that they are professing to do, let's say you're a certified developer or you're a certified product X engineer, you need to demonstrate that, right? You need to be able to demonstrate that I can take the thing out of the box and you can build the thing, right? Or hey, I have some code I'm trying to build or fix, or I want to build this new widget, or I want to just run this program. Like, are you the right guy? So sometimes certifications are important, and if you work with third-party vendors, you'll see more and more of what's called accreditation, the business side of making sure that organization has the right contracts in place, the right assurances, and is generally reviewed as a company in good standing. Again, all these things play in: people, process, and technology. On the process side, I can't say how important it is to write these things down. Write down processes. When you are new to an organization, it seems like it's the best time to do it, right? Which is like, how do these things work? Let me map some of these things out. But it's also really important for the guys on the team that have been there for a while to map out and constantly update system flows, because threats change, things change. And sometimes it's a great exercise to say, hey, let me review this process. What documentation do we have from when we built it a couple of years ago? And how do we optimize that flow? You're always going to find things to improve. Again, budget the time for you, right? You're going to do a process review. There's going to be labor that's needed to make the process updated. So think about that in context. You might have 300 or 100 different processes in your business. Each one of them takes a little bit of time to model and to flow out. So again, optimizing the business is a great way to use what you got, focus on the team, make some strong, resilient steps, such as, hey, if this ISP was to go down at my remote location, am I out of business? Do I have a backup facility or a backup ISP that I can sort of fail over to? At some point, it's going to become required of the business from a service level perspective, right? If you have a bunch of people that are there that can't do anything because the internet connection's down, well, if that's acceptable to the business, great. But in many cases, sending everybody home is probably not a great option. Now, if everybody has laptops and you can send everybody to the coffee shop across the street, hey, more power to you. But my point is there has to be some understanding of what optimization is within the business. And then, of course, you have to also have what's now referred to as a supply chain risk management program. This could be very simple, right? Very simple. If you are buying office supplies from ABC company, right? The paper, the toner, the things that you need to do business has to show up. You're buying food supplies. The food has to show up untainted. There has to be no issues with delivery. And if there is, you probably have alternative suppliers. If you're buying, let's say, software from somebody, and that software has a fatal flaw or a significant problem, well, your contract hopefully has statements that they're going to fix it, hopefully at their cost, to go ahead and continue the resilience in the business that you need to ensure happens. If you're buying from the big ISV software providers, again, it's important to look for service providers that meet a minimum standard. I remember at SafeCode, one of the big initiatives that we did at SafeCode was focused around the fundamental software security practices. Again, businesses would pledge to meet minimum requirements, and these were the requirements. So if you understand what those requirements are, then you can map them to your risk tolerance. Does that make sense? And also, since we throw out a plug for SafeCode, and if you are doing software, please take the time to review the fantastic guide known as the third-party components guide. Again, great a lot of work went into that tied to software supply chain and what happens with developers using third-party tools or third-party helps. You can't have a Zoom meeting without a dog bark. So I'm kind of sorry that that's happened, but my dog will probably bark. So let me get into the next step of this, which is called chaos theory. I like to look at chaos theory as a thing that people should do. And you should do this when you have a fairly stable environment, because again, it does throw a little wrench in the works. But what would happen if you happen to walk into a room and basically hit a power switch on a switch, right? Chaos, right? People would stop working. It would be a little traumatic for some people. Others, they would say, hey, it's time for coffee. But again, looking at the concept of what happens when I do something in the business, what happens when the bad guy does something. So chaos theory is continuing to look at how do we disrupt things and what are the resiliencies that are in place. Particularly any good program is going to look for other routes. And think of it like the BGP tables, right? If I'm going to send a packet across the internet, it can travel many different ways based on what? Latency, route, etc. But if one of those systems is out, it's going to reroute, right? It's going to redirect. The same way that autonomous cars should be focused on this model example. So again, think about navigating your way through complex, unpredictable issues in cybersecurity, and whether that be taking drills or again tabletop exercises. It really helps people sort of digest all the different things that are on your plate, and then prioritize the ones that are the most important to the business. So again, getting buy-in at that level is super important. Because a lot of times things come down to the 5 whys. Why are things not the way they should be? And a lot of times you can get to that answer or root cause by asking the question the right way, right? So define the problem. Let's say, for example, you had a help desk and your help desk wasn't performing up to par. But the help desk is, let's say, third party, it's outsourced, right? So people may complain and say, hey, the help desk isn't very helpful, right? That's always a good one. So why is this happening, right? I would say, oh, maybe it's training. Okay. Well, why is that happening? Why is training the problem? Well, because we haven't taken the time to train those people, okay? Well, why is that? Oh, well, because we're really busy. We don't have time to train the people that help the people. Really? Right? So you can start seeing the cascading failure of why. So when you ask the question several times, you get to a root cause of, well, why did the help desk fail? Well, it wasn't because the help desk had really any problem. It was because the team that was supporting the help desk, as an example, maybe didn't take the time to train them appropriately or hold them accountable from the early days. So again, you can always find root cause by the 5 whys, including when either coworkers or even your family do some wacky stuff. Ask the question 5 times. Well, why? Well, why? And drive it down to root cause. It's a great little exercise that helps you sort of come down to that conclusion. So one thing we haven't really talked about yet is law. Law is very unique. I always say there's the big law and the little law. The big law are things that are going to have the big laws are going to have things that are going to tie you usually to jail, meaning like break law, go to jail, right? Big L. Compliance is going to be like, hey, if you don't do this, PCI is not going to be happy and you can't process credit cards, right? The PCI council. Is that detrimental? Yeah. Are you potentially going to break a law and go to jail over it? Probably not. Again, I'm just trying to throw out there that we have to start looking at some of the laws and then mapping things back to the business. Everyone wants to keep data protected and they understand the value, and nobody wants to be having their assets stolen or misused. But when we talk about things that are tied to like the Federal Trade Commission, and we got to make sure about what the process is about fair trade, you have some requirements there that are very, very important to map. We talk about the GLBA, like the new safeguard rules that are tied to having people that are chartered as data privacy owners, and individuals are going to train their staff, and that you're going to have a written information security policy outlining your guidelines. Again, many things that are going to be useful. But if you're ignorant to the fact that there's laws in your backyard, you may also be surprised to find out that if you operate a business, let's say in New York State or anywhere else in the United States that handles New York State residents, then you may fall under the New York State DFS 500. Now, again, there's some parameters there, right? You got to do over $10 million, and you might be a mortgage company or a hedge fund, et cetera. But you have some reporting requirements that are required by law. And if you don't do it, of course, heavy fines can be levied against you. But more importantly, negligence is usually not an excuse, right? Like not knowing that the road was 55 miles an hour and I'm doing 80 down the road, no excuse, right, Tom? You probably should have known it was 55 or 65, but you probably shouldn't have been doing 80, right? So it is what it is. And then every state has these ever-changing laws, particularly associated with data breach. Some have very, very short incident response or reporting requirements. Other ones have a more lax approach. Again, looking at who your client data is, what your data is, what the makeup of it is, it maps. It's going to map back to some of these regulatory items. So the key thing is being commercially defensible. Commercially defensible. Some folks have coined the phrase that it's a tax on the business, right? I think you might be right at times, because again, if you're going through the different controls, if you're operating the technology in the business to protect the data, protect the business, and help the team do its job, then that does have a cost. And again, it all ties back, I think, a little bit to the business and the business leadership. So for myself, I had the pleasure of being with the United States Marine Corps, and I really do pride leadership qualities that I was taught with some of the great people that I worked under. Being able to look at different components of how this works, and how I personally would be proud to work for people that have some of the same or similar qualities. the number one, of course, is kind of loyalty, right? Like to the team, to the people, being able to have good judgment, being able to be dependable, and know that the team's going to help us or help you with the project that's in front of you, and being able to stand up and have the courage to say no at times. And that could be your department manager or the business owner, quite frankly. And then lastly, the integrity and the tact to get things done. So again, I use that as an example of examples that I like to work from. And I think I try to do that with many of the projects that I work on is sort of lead from the front. Because whether you're leading or following, at the end of the day, you're trying to make hopefully the world a better place, and the business that you're associated with hopefully is producing a product, a service, etc. That's wholesome. It's good. It would be questionable ethics in my world to work for any organization that you don't believe in their end product. Money's important, but some things are more important than that. Right? So go back to always the mission statement of who the business is, who they are, what they do, what the vision statement is of the business, what the strategy is to get there. And if you align these components of every business to your cybersecurity program and you reference it, like we're going to do threat intelligence because we're concerned that it would disrupt our strategy about how we get to this vision, right? We can't accomplish our mission of the business of getting to Mars unless we have these things under control. Like there's got to be different things that are going to be tied to the business, which need to resonate for purposes of budget and for the purposes of speaking to the boardroom about how your cybersecurity program could help them. So again, we look at keys, and the keys are always going to be both the threats and the opportunities. There's always going to be threats to the business, right? Because a bad guy is always looking for means, motive, and opportunity to cause disruption and pain, take things from those that are, not protecting them, or it's like the lion who looks for the deer who's the last one in the herd that might be, maimed or not doing too well. Take them down first. If that same lion is going to go for the leader of the pack, it might be a little more difficult. So the analogy sometimes I've heard is you're not going to be faster than the bear. You just got to outrun your friend who's behind you. That's an interesting one. But I would really try not to make the bear upset. Right? Let's try to protect the field. So again, there's always that the red-blue conversation. You can always put your head in the sand and say, it's never going to happen to us. We don't got to do any of that stuff because we don't need it. And then there's the other side of saying, well, there's some interesting thoughts there that might be able to be applied to the organization. So with that, I hope that my information was useful to you, spark some discussion, maybe debate within your team, and I would hope to help in any way possible. Again, I'd like to apply my security experiences and my industry background to help organizations, and with our friends at Crest, it's exactly what we're doing. So again, thank you for your time. There's certainly never enough of that, and it is certainly the most valuable. If there's anything we can do for you, please reach out. Thank you.